The March 19 meeting of the Williamsburg City Council will come to order. Ms. Felico, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Maslin.
Here.
Ms. Ramsey.
Here.
Mayor Freiling.
Here.
Vice Mayor Pons.
Here.
Mr. Zhang.
Here.
Let me start off by apologizing for the delay in the broadcast. We are trying out some technology that is new to us, and it hasn't exactly been seamless, but it appears to be working. So we're going to go ahead. The first item on our agenda was to be a briefing on the current conditions regarding coronavirus COVID-19 by Dr. Steve Julian. Unfortunately, Dr. Julian has not joined in yet, so we will go on with our regular business. And if Dr. Julian is able to come in later on, we will stop what we're doing and allow him to give his report and then continue forward. So the first item of new business is consideration and adoption of Resolution 20-06, confirming a local emergency declaration and finding a local disaster. Ms. Shelton, do you want to lead this off?
So on the 13th of March, the emergency manager of the city, who is the city manager, declared a local emergency.
So the first item of new business is consideration and adoption of resolution. If somebody has their television on in the background, perhaps, we're getting feedback, delayed feedback. Shelton, do you want to lead this off?
So on the 13th of March, the emergency manager of the city, who is the city manager, declared a local emergency.
So the first item of new business is consideration and adoption of resolution. If somebody has their television on in the background, perhaps, getting feedback, delayed feedback. Shelton, do you want to lead this off?
So on the 13th of March, the emergency manager of the city, who is the city manager, declared a local emergency.
So the first item of new business is consideration and adoption of resolution. If somebody has their television on in the background, perhaps, getting feedback, delayed feedback. You want to lead this off?
So on the 13th of March, the emergency manager of the city, who is the city manager, declared a local emergency.
So the first item of new business is consideration and adoption of resolution. If somebody has their television on in the background, perhaps.
Okay, I think we've identified where the problem is.
One more time, Ms. Shelton.
I think it might be Ms. Shelton's computer.
That presents a problem. Mr. Trivett, you want to give us some background on this?
I will do my best. The city actually declared a state of emergency on March the 13th through the Emergency Operations Center. I signed the declaration. And now where we find ourselves is we need to adopt a revised declaration that also finds a disaster. And that's important because it will enable us to access other sections of state code and city code that will enable us to have online meetings, which is a further item on the agenda. March the 13th, through the Emergency Operations Center, I signed the declaration.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Trivett?
Yeah, well, I guess just generally, can you talk a little bit more about what the declaration of disaster versus declaration of emergency would allow us to do? Is there any more detail you can add to that?
Well, the declaration of a disaster allows us to, and maybe Ms. Shelton's computer is back.
I've closed everything else.
Okay, go ahead, Chris.
So there's a code section in this, the Code of Virginia, that gives us some flexibility with respect to what we do in dealing with the situation. The governor's declaration on the 12th specifically references the section in the Code of Virginia that declares this a disaster. It is that disaster declaration that gives us some flexibility in the code with respect to meetings that we can have electronically and conducting the normal continuity of government while this situation is going on. And so the finding of a disaster is important in addition to the ratification of the emergency.
Okay.
Ms. Shelton, this gives us access to a certain set of the Virginia Code to provide some express authorization, such as how to conduct public meetings. I know right now there's been some conversations and some interest among folks of the General Assembly to convene an emergency session. If they do so amend the code, would those take to effect with our disaster finding resolution today?
Well, that would depend on what they do. And so at that point, we would take whatever steps we would need to take in order to enact what they tell us to enact. But for the time being, we have a code section that specifically references the disaster finding. The governor has made that finding. And so we're mirroring the governor's disaster finding in this resolution.
Thank you.
Just as a point of reference, I spoke with via email with one of our city businesses today who was looking into their, and I realize we're just talking about how to operate these meetings, but was looking into loss of business on their insurance policy. And one of the things that they found out is that if the city had made certain declarations, such as forcing businesses to close, then that would be a disaster that insurance companies would cover. Does this declaration allow us to force businesses to close? Or could we do that under normal circumstances?
So the Code of Virginia gives you certain authorities with respect to emergency actions taken by the emergency staff and the council. There are actions that need to be confirmed by the governor and approved by the governor, and we have taken the position that doing that is one of those things.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Other questions from Ms. Shelton?
No questions.
Do I have a motion?
I move that the City Council approve Resolution 20-06 as drafted.
Second.
Ms. Felico? I think Ms. Felico may be muted.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey,
Aye.
Mayor Freiling,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons,
All right.
Mr. Zhang.
Aye.
This takes us to the second item of new business today, which is consideration and adoption of Ordinance 20-02, establishing emergency procedures for the continuity and operation of the government of the City of Williamsburg for the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic. Ms. Shelton, do you want to describe this as well?
So this is the ordinance that we're requesting that City Council adopt specifically, that will allow City Council to have meetings that don't necessarily fall within the emergency, that deal specifically with the emergency. So for example, City Council's regular meeting where council would be dealing with the budget or other issues of city business that can't be put off for an extended period of time. The reference for that comes both from the city's charter and from section 15.2.14.13 of the Code of Virginia, which gives us some latitude with respect to what we can do in the event of a disaster. Thus, the importance of confirming what the governor did with respect to our finding of an emergency and a disaster. The ordinance itself specifically authorizes City Council and the city's boards and commissions to meet electronically until the emergency is ended, or September 12th, 2020, whichever comes first, because it's only authorizing these actions for a period of 6 months. The ordinance specifically provides that the public must be able to participate in these meetings, either by observing the meetings or actually participating in the meetings electronically. That the notices for those meetings must be posted on the city's website, and that all other provisions of FOIA will be met, which means that we've got to provide notices If we have a public hearing, those have to be advertised according to whatever law governs when those have to be advertised. That the public will be able to participate in the meeting, and if there are matters, and it leaves it up to the city manager to determine whether or not public hearings need to occur. So he's going to be able to put those on the agenda or remove those from the agenda. So we're not doing things we don't need to do, but that's left up to the discretion of the city manager in this ordinance. It also allows us to conduct the public meetings that we need to conduct on a staff level. For example, there are public meetings that are required pursuant to the Virginia Public Procurement Act electronically instead of in person during the duration of the emergency. So it's very basic. This ordinance only provides those powers that we need to be able to meet for council to be able to make the decisions that city council needs to make as we progress through this time, even in those circumstances where it isn't directly pertaining to the emergency.
So Ms. Shelton, just to be clear, it is possible then that there would be business that would normally come before city council that we would defer acting on because that business was not urgent.
Yes.
Even though it might be perceived in the case of a particular applicant's perspective that they want their issue to move forward. But if it isn't a greater urgency to the community, then we would hold off on that until a later date when we could hold a normal public hearing.
That's correct. And the city manager would be the person who would make that decision.
I think that's very important for people to understand, especially people who may have anything related to zoning or development issues, that these items just may not be able to be considered. Are there questions from Ms. Shelton? Mr. Pons, you want to start?
No questions.
Mr. Zhang?
Pretty straightforward. Thank you, Chris.
Ms. Ramsey?
No questions.
Mr. Maslin?
No questions.
Okay, do I have a motion?
I move that the city council approve ordinance 20-02 as drafted.
Second.
Ms. Felico?
Mr. Maslin,
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey,
Aye.
Mayor Freiling,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons,
Aye.
Mr. Zhang.
Aye.
This takes us to the third item of new business today, which is consideration and adoption of ordinance 20-03, amending the due date for the payment of prepared food and beverage and transient lodging taxes in the city of Williamsburg. Ms. Shelton, do you want to talk about this also?
This is, again, another one of these emergency measures that we're requesting council take. This does not in any way impact the requirement that food and beverage tax be collected, nor does it change any reporting requirements. It simply changes the due date for the next 2 months to May 1st of 2020.
Questions from Ms. Shelton?
Ms. Shelton, so I understand that what we're offering is for businesses that collect room and meals tax to pay this tax until on April 20th versus March 20th, which is tomorrow. These businesses are still required. Will they be required to submit their payment form to the city by tomorrow so that there's a recording of it?
Yes.
So just to be clear, businesses that collect room and meals tax have to report every month what their sales was. Typically, and that includes a worksheet that determines what your taxable amount is to remit, and then you include a check for payment. That form still has to be submitted to the city, but just without the payment.
Yes.
Okay.
And aren't we saying that the March and April would be postponed until May 1st?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. Yeah. And I think it's important because, it offers some business some latitude with their cash flow. But it's important to note that this money is still due on May 20th, or is it May 1st?
May 1st.
May 1st, excuse me. Yeah.
Other questions? Discussion?
I have no questions, but I think this is a step in the right direction. It's a small step, but nevertheless, it's a step towards that direction, especially at a time where our local economy is grinded to a halt. And we appreciate all the feedback we've heard from concerned business owners, but wanted to extend my appreciation to staff for taking this step and proposing this before council today.
And just as an aside, I would agree with Councilman Zhang that in my appreciation to the staff, and also it is the first step in something that we as all members of council can offer to businesses. And it gives time while we wait to see what further options will come forward from both the state and federal.
I agree.
Okay, do I hear a motion?
So I move that City Council adopt Ordinance 20-03 as drafted.
Second.
Ms. Felico?
Mr. Maslin,
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey,
Aye.
Mayor Freiling,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons,
Aye.
Mr. Zhang.
Aye.
Well, that concludes our new business today, and unfortunately, we still do not have Dr. Julian on the line, at least not that I can see. So with that, we'll go forward and go to open forum. Do we, anybody who'd like to address council on any matter?
Are there members of the public that are able to call into this?
There was a posting earlier today that gave the information. We did have to change the meetings, which might have made that a little bit more complicated, but I do know that we did receive on our posted email address a comment from a citizen that asked us to consider coming out with a statement regarding the governor's 10-person restriction in restaurants and bars. And you know, in an earlier discussion, what we conclude is that the city of Williamsburg has no authority to in any way go against the governor's restriction. So that's not a position that we can take.
Right. To that, if I may, Mr. Trivett, how do we identify restaurants and bars as a place to limit the number of people versus grocery stores, churches, convenience stores?
Right, and I think that's a very good question, Mr. Pons, but not one that I can answer. You know, I'm sure that the governor acted on the best advice of the CDC and the Virginia Department of Health. I'm sure that's something they considered, but I was not included.
Okay, thank you.
Any other business?
Mr. Freiling, if I could just have some latitude to talk about something that Councilman Zhang and I have done in partnership with the Williamsburg Community Foundation.
Sure.
Benny and I, recognizing just the plight that our citizens are under now, particularly the service industry folks, you know, given that most restaurants are closed and have very, very limited capacity, hotels are seeing occupancies under 5%. That those folks that work in those industries are really, they're unemployed now, and they're going to be struggling with providing meals and paying the rent and utilities. And so he and I got together and contributed $10,000 to a non-endowed field of interest fund at the Community Foundation. It's going to be called the Community Emergency Response Fund. It's open for others to donate funds to it. And I would encourage people to do that. The Community Foundation will distribute those funds entirely in keeping with their bylaws and their just the way that they typically do things. And so with that, I would encourage folks to, if they have the wherewithal, to consider donating to the fund so those monies can get out to the community. But moreover, if people have the ability to set some funds aside to make a contribution to those organizations that they deem worthy to support those people in their community that are really struggling. So I just wanted to take a moment to get that message out that you know, Williamsburg is a resilient community. We're you know, in my lifetime here, I've seen ups and downs in the economy, and I know that we really are best when we work together. And I think we're going to get through this. There's opportunities here, for us to all band together and help one another. So make that announcement.
And
Thank you, Mr.
I would
Chairman.
just like
It's good. Go ahead.
to add in, if I may, that notice of the emergency fund has already been picked up by WY Daily and is being distributed. And I think it mentions that Mr. Zhang has already posted it on his Facebook page. So it's getting some advertisement out there and hopefully will elicit some other funds. I think that in addition to this, people have to remember there are lots of different ways to help people. And as we help one another, it helps us feel better ourselves and gives a little bit of a message of hope that we will come out of this and be stronger for it, as you say. So thank you for taking that step.
Thank you, Mr. Pons and Mr. Zhang. We appreciate that. I'm sure the entire community appreciates it. I'd also like to take this moment to offer my own special set of thanks to city staff. I think it's hard for most people to appreciate everything that they have been doing in the background over the past couple of weeks now, actually probably several weeks now, if not month, and all the work that they do around the clock, through the weekend, tirelessly, manning our hotline, working on contingency planning, even setting up this meeting. It may not have started off exactly the way we would have liked, but a lot of work goes in to make these things happen. And this is on top of everything else staff has to do, and now under far more challenging circumstances where they're not able to come together and convene the way they used to, the way any of us used to in the workplace. So my hat's off to everybody, Mr. Trivett, and the entire city team. And I'm under no illusion that we won't be asking even more of you as the days and months go on, but I just want to extend my appreciation for everything that you do.
I echo that sentiment.
And
Mr.
I
Mayor,
would,
Second.
I've got a comment too.
I would just like to say if there's any way that we can help out with the staff, please let us know. I still have some cookies in my freezer.
You should have told us that, Barbara. You should not have told us that.
Well, let me chime in real quick and extend, besides the mayor's remarks and also the vice mayor's remarks. I think we are such an incredibly lucky community. There have been folks that have been calling all of us on council asking what they could do about, and also there are folks who have already taken action, which is incredible. Whether it's trying to shore up food bank shortages or providing some sort of financial assistance. Wow, like what a great community we live in, and I think we're incredibly blessed. And as the vice mayor said, we are very resilient, and that spirit shows.
And Mr. Mayor, yeah, I'd like to also offer my comments on that. We're lucky as a community to benefit from so many nonprofits here. And this event has really dealt a blow to many of their fund driving activities, especially this time of year. So to the degree people can donate to the nonprofits that they continue to support, even more and maybe quicker this year, the better. Also, a lot of those nonprofits rely on seniors for their staffing, their labor, as well as college students. So, they can't really do as many of the outreach missions that they have done previously because of that. One of the things that we talked about in our board meeting for one of the nonprofits yesterday was, we have this social distancing, which is a physical thing, but we should probably double our efforts in terms of reaching out to people by phone to give them support, because it's the people that can't get out that really need the uplift, and a lot of phone calls to them might really help out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maslin. Excellent points. Any other business for today?
Mr. Mayor, I just offer that we've been trying to work through the issues we were having with Dr. Julian joining the meeting. Unfortunately, we weren't able to overcome them for this meeting. I know that the city of Hampton recorded a conversation with Dr. Julian and posted it to Facebook Live last night. I've not watched it in its entirety, but I'm told it's very informative. We will look at ways that we can copy that and post it to our website so people can view it. Then if we have an opportunity to have future meetings, number one, I promise technology is better. And number two, we will see if we can get another briefing opportunity from Dr. Drew.
Okay. Anything else? Anyone? Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Ms. Palico?
Mr. Maslin,
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey,
Aye.
Mayor Freiling,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons,
Aye.
Mr. Zhang.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.